Hey, welcome back to the Next Page Man. We're diving into another exciting chapter of Prince Arel's ongoing quest for the ultimate life of comfort. So buckle up and let's embark on this adventure together. Upon hearing their destination was the slave market, Asha's mind swirled with grim imagery. She envisioned Prince Arel subjecting the slaves to inhumane treatment, making them toil in the freezing cold, and administering harsh whippings as punishment. She pictured him ominously warning the slaves to perform their duties flawlessly, or they wouldn't be fed even a single slice of bread. Prince Arel was genuinely shocked and deeply hurt by Asha's horrific assumptions about his conduct. He implored her to cast aside these misconstrued perceptions. With a note of sincere regret in her voice, she apologized to the prince for harboring such prejudiced thoughts of him. And with that, their nocturnal journey drew to its conclusion. Usually, when one envisions a slave market, the mind often paints a grim scene of undernourished, desperate individuals pleading for salvation from the confines of iron cages. It's essentially a place of tormented souls, where familial bonds are callously severed. But upon Prince Arel's arrival at the slave market, he was taken aback by the neatness of the surroundings. Every corner was immaculate, and the slaves working there looked surprisingly robust. Asha elucidated to Prince Arel that should a slave succumb to an unknown illness, it would spell disaster for all. Thus, stringent cleanliness protocols were paramount. After absorbing Asha's insights, Prince Arel acquiesced, appreciating the significance of this practice. Overhearing Asha's narrative, a man concurred with her points. He went on to extol the slave market's exceptional management system, dubbing it the preeminent slave market in the capital, unsurpassed in its stringent and effective operations. The man extended his greeting to Prince Arel and introduced himself as Ian, the overseer of the slave market. Prince Arel informed him that formalities were unnecessary, as he was merely a prospective client and Ian should know the details of this trip. Amused, Ian responded that such an occasion called for even more decorum, and he beckoned them to follow him as he clarified that they adhered to lawful procedures in the slave market, where patrons could trade in the buying and selling of slaves. He happily wanted to quell Prince Arel's concerns, asserting that there was nothing to fret about. Curious, Prince Arel turned to Asha to inquire about the circumstances that led people into slavery. However, before he could finish his sentence, Asha answered as if she had read his thoughts. She explained that some individuals found themselves shackled in servitude because they had failed to pay their taxes, or because they were the last vestiges of noble families that had once flourished but had now crumbled into decay. This revelation spurred a question from Prince Arel. He inquired if a person would be instantaneously enslaved if their family fell into ruin. Yet the stark truth, as Asha pointed out, was that within the bounds of slavery, at least they were spared the torturous pangs of starvation. Ian also noted that they also housed thieves and other offenders. However, he was quick to assure Prince Arel that there was no cause for alarm regarding these individuals. As he ushered them into his office, the implication hung in the air that the lawbreakers were segregated from the general slave population. Prince Arel presumes that, given Ian's foreknowledge of his visit, he had already dealt with the criminals. If his assumption held true, then he had no objections whatsoever. As Ian settled into his seat, a shift came over his demeanor, and he inquired about the kind of slaves Prince Arel was seeking. In response, the prince conveyed his need for a significant number of slaves and questioned whether such a demand could be accommodated. Ian, brimming with assurance, confirmed that it was possible and queried about the exact number of slaves the prince intended to acquire. Upon hearing that Prince Arel was planning on securing at least 150 slaves, Ian was taken aback. The prince asked if this number was too overwhelming for him. Gathering his composure, Ian reassured him that it wouldn't be an issue. Their organization maintained a facility outside the capital specifically for slave management. Consequently, accommodating thrice the number requested wouldn't pose a problem. but Ian questioned the prince's need for such an extensive workforce. In response, Prince Arel assured him that his intentions were not sinister, and that Ian needn't fret over the intended use of the slaves. The prince, however, did stipulate a specific requirement for the slaves he sought to acquire. He requested that Ian provide him with several groups of 4 or 5 slaves who shared familial ties, were close neighbors, or had prior acquaintanceships. Taken aback by this unorthodox request, Ian voiced that fulfilling such a requirement might pose a challenge, as it was not unusual for entire families to be subjected to slavery. Notwithstanding, he beckoned his subordinates to produce a list of slaves that met Prince Arel's stipulations. Perusing the list of potential candidates, Prince Arel sought Ian's assistance in selecting slaves literate enough to read. He further queried if it would be feasible to have the slaves delivered to a designated location. To this, Ian readily accepted. Upon reaching an agreement, Prince Arel presented the payment, astonishing Ian with a pouch teeming with an array of jewels and gold. Such a lavish offering made Ian particularly accommodating to the prince's demands, reinforcing the prevailing belief that money remains the most effective negotiator. Later that day in the carriage, Asha questioned Prince Arel regarding his intentions for the slaves. The prince gleefully shared that they were slated to become residents of the estate towards which they were journeying. He understood that the populace of the territory was sparse, and perceived no value in reigning over desolate lands. Further, Prince Arel envisaged supplying them with artifacts and imparting education to each family unit. His grand scheme for the slaves took Asha by surprise. With a determined mindset and a resolve that refused to be quelled, Prince Arel had no intention of simply enduring a quiet life in his territory. His ambitions were high, to make the land the finest domain possible to ensure a life of supreme comfort for himself. After all, the MANHWA is aptly titled, "How a Former Pro Takes Advantage by Doing an Easy Job." Each decision, every action, was geared towards ensuring the ease of his life. Grinning from ear to ear, he relished the thought of putting his newly acquired workforce to good use, pushing them to their limits in Fahili, and as he anticipated the paradise he was to build, the sun gradually descended, as their carriage continued on the path back home. As dawn broke, Prince Arel faced the impending difficulty of bidding farewell to his family and childhood home. His mother, teary-eyed, came to see him. Engulfing him in an embrace, she voiced her concerns for his well-being. Prince Arel soothed her worries, promising frequent visits bearing gifts. He also reminded her that his departure was still a year away, imploring her to stave off her tears. Prince Arel had anticipated this emotional reaction from his mother, and chose to keep the location of the estate undisclosed for the time being. In the midst of these events, Princess Kanya struggled to accept Prince Arel's impending departure, her discontent directed towards those in her vicinity. Despite comprehending the circumstances surrounding the prince, she found it challenging to reconcile them with her feelings, especially considering she hadn't seen him for 6 months, and the news had only just reached her. Her subordinates were intimidated as she radiated a formidable aura. Her subordinates quivered as she exuded an imposing aura. Unbeknownst to them, Prince Arel's book, "Anyone Can Become a Knight," explains that if one continually channels strong emotions, the mana inside the body will flow more naturally, albeit at a faster pace. Hence, on that destiny-bound day, the youngest sword master and the third in the history of the kingdom came into existence. However, the underlying catalyst, Princess Kanya's mix of fascination and irritation towards her younger brother, was a truth likely to remain undisclosed. As he reflected on his past life, Prince Arel wondered if the emotions he was experiencing now mirrored those he felt back then. Time seemed to have a way of accelerating during pivotal moments in his life. He remembered how the days between receiving his enlistment notice and the day he joined the military seemed to blur and pass in a swift rush. A similar feeling was now pervading him, as he prepared to venture out to establish his own territory, as each day rushed by, bringing him closer to his impending independence. Now at the age of 14, he marked his birthday and coming-of-age ceremony. Among the attendees, a noble by the name of Sir Beryl approached him with celebratory words. Although he received the well wishes and congratulations graciously, Prince Arel found himself more and more irritated with each passing moment. The nobility, with their bootlicking smiles and flattering words, had become a thorn in his side. When he was a child, he could easily avoid them, pretending to sleep or acting naive. But those days were gone, and he was now expected to engage and interact with these nobles, pretending to be interested in their endless chatter. Regardless, he maintained his polite facade, carefully concealing his true feelings. After all, as a prince, such was his duty. And in just a month, he would be free of these tedious obligations and could focus on his own independent territory. As the nobility oozed with delight that Prince Arel's birthday was a celebration that every citizen will celebrate, he knew the reality was that these nobles were glad to be rid of him. Their glistening eyes and pompous laughs were merely a mask for their relief to see him banished to the countryside. However, he checked his temper and conducted himself with the decorum befitting a prince. His mother was watching after all, and he wouldn't give the satisfaction to these high and mighty nobles by losing his temper. Reassuring himself that in just a month's time, he would be liberated from the pompous circle of these nobles. Just then, Queen Alera gracefully approached Prince Arel, offering her congratulations on his coming of age. She sympathetically noted that his mother must harbor some sorrow, as the time for him to depart for his new territory approached. Rising to address the queen, Prince Arel received her sentiments, stating it was an inevitable occurrence, and that he was privileged to have the chance to contribute to the kingdom at such a young age. Inwardly, however, Prince Arel couldn't help but suspect that the queen's appearance was an attempt to probe his emotional state. Regardless, she extended her gratitude towards him, recognizing that his guidance had significantly improved Prince Zael's swordsmanship. Following this, she presented him with a gift from Prince Zael himself. A shroud of suspicion enveloped Prince Arel, as he pondered over the intent of the impending gift, since his past encounters with the queen had left him strained and contemplated a polite refusal. However, in the end, he accepted the gesture, revealing a luxurious coat, meticulously fashioned from the fur of foxes indigenous to Thalia. Upon receiving the gift, Prince Arel became aware that Queen Alera was the true puppeteer behind these events. He had entertained this notion previously, given his knowledge that Prince Zael was hardly the scheming type to orchestrate such political maneuvering against his own brother. It became clear that the only entity with enough sway to amass the appeal of the entire nobility, pushing for his early territorial assignment, was the queen herself. Aware of the queen's manipulative tendencies, Prince Arel perceived the gift as a taunting jest aimed at him, and understood that he had to rein in his anger, as succumbing to it would risk lowering himself to those he despised. Concealing his resentment behind a polished smile, he expressed his gratitude to the queen, assuring her that he had already greeted his older brother and would assist Prince Zael whenever it was required. Although Queen Alera appeared charmed by Prince Arel's proclamation, she was fundamentally indifferent to his offer of support. Their exchange was veiled in fake pleasantries and begs for the day when they would all forego their facades to never happen. As the banquet began to wind down, Prince Arel felt a nagging sensation that he had overlooked something crucial. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Princess Kanya, who was still steeped in intense silence. Given the belated announcement of his departure, he expected her to harbor resentment and had planned to apologize. However, he was taken aback by the determination that suddenly appeared on her face. A sense of foreboding gripped Prince Arel as he struggled to understand Princess Kanya's intent. Her demeanor, resembling that of a master who had just made a life-altering decision, sparked unease within him. He couldn't dismiss the gnawing suspicion that Princess Kanya was on the verge of creating a scene. boldly addressing her father, the king. His response was measured, suggesting they postpone their discussion, as the current setting wasn't suitable for a serious discussion. Yet Princess Kanya remained undaunted, openly declaring her intention to accompany Prince Arel when he departs in a month. Her sudden announcement sent shockwaves through the crowd, and Prince Arel's gaze immediately darted to the princess's mother, hoping that she would step in. Yet, the resignation etched on her face told him that even she was helpless in the face of Princess Kanya's resolution. The king's anger flared at Princess Kanya's defiance, but Prince Arel knew that Princess Kanya's stubbornness would only grow and that any attempt to dissuade her would only fortify her determination. Despite this, he found himself perplexed as to why Princess Kanya had chosen to accompany him. Unshaken by the king's pressure, Princess Kanya declared her intent to serve as Prince Arel's knight, which took Prince Arel by surprise. The king, infuriated, started to lecture the hardships of knighthood, emphasizing that wielding a sword was not enough. But before he could continue, Kanya dropped a bombshell. She publicized that she recently ascended to the coveted rank of a sword master, a proclamation that left the assembly stunned and caused Prince Arel to find himself taken aback. The king found it difficult to believe her claim, as she was just 19, and the only known instance of someone achieving the title of a sword master at such a young age was the late king. Undeterred by their disbelief, Princess Kanya commandeered a sword from a nearby guard and proceeded to demonstrate her prowess to the onlooking attendees. With an impressive show of strength, she managed to cleave a table in two using nothing more than her aura. The spectators were left amazed at the spectacle, their doubts swept away by the sheer display of her martial proficiency. In a passionate declaration, Princess Kanya openly confessed her feelings and asserted her unwillingness to wed someone she didn't cherish, and declared her preference for the path of a knight over that of a traditional princess. Upon hearing her heartfelt proclamation, Prince Arel felt a surge of emotions, but the precarious situation Princess Kanya had crafted seemed to prohibit him from expressing them. Her assertion to renounce her title as a princess could yield severe repercussions, plunging Prince Arel into a panic. He questioned who could have instilled such a rebellious streak in her, only to face the unnerving realization that he might be the culprit himself. Princess Kanya then proceeded to showcase her earnestness by kneeling before Prince Arel, swearing her fealty to him as his knight, and pledging to stand by his side through all the trials they were bound to encounter.
The sword that I have trained for life, and the sword that I have to train in the future. In this place, I swear that I will dedicate it to you. I swear to stand by your side and defeat all the hardships that stand in your way with my sword. From this moment on, I, Kanya, vow to be your knight.
Prince Arel is beset with doubts concerning Princess Kanya's alleged knighthood. As she is a royal princess, her lack of a formal knighthood is concerning. Moreover, she lacks his consent, which casts further uncertainty over her claim. To compound his troubles, the eyes of numerous nobles are scrutinizing their every move. The gravity of a knight's oath is immense, particularly for an individual who has ascended to the esteemed rank of Aura Master like Princess Kanya. With this understanding, the crowd has no option but to acknowledge the oath. Amid this, Prince Arel is beset by a throbbing headache, as he recognizes they have all become pawns in Princess Kanya's calculated scheme. In Princess Kanya's mind, her decision to follow the naive prince was far from being purely out of concern. It was a cleverly devised strategy to carve out her own destiny and evade an undesired arranged marriage. Her mother fainted upon hearing the news, while the king's face took on a stormy cast, as if he had been struck by a bolt from the blue. Prince Arel, observing the queen's reaction, couldn't help but revel in a sense of schadenfreude, considering her recent actions as a just dessert for a perpetual tormentor. However, he also recognized that the scenario had become distressingly convoluted, and the queen's foul mood was now palpable in the air. Tears welled up in Prince Arel's eyes, as the gravity of the situation hit him. He ruefully pondered his curse of never having a peaceful birthday, a pattern that seemed to persist since he turned one, and wished to abstain from celebrating his birthdays with such chaotic banquets in the future. The commotion continued after the banquet, but time kept passing. Preparations for Prince Arel's departure were complete, and it was time for him to bid farewell to his mother and her loyal maid, China. His mother, awash with melancholy at her son's impending departure, reminisced about the time when he was just a baby, a memory that seemed like only yesterday to her. Prince Arel promises to visit her often and asks her not to worry too much. His mother confesses that both China and her were worried when he was a baby because he did not cry often, but expresses her gratitude that he matured seamlessly. After hearing his mother's words, Prince Arel realizes he still has a long way to go. His mother advises him not to hesitate to ask for help if he ever gets sick. He yearned to comfort her, to tell her that his new territory poses no danger, but is caught off guard to find out she already knows about his new estate. This revelation forces Prince Arel to confront the fact that, no matter his experience and abilities, he remains helpless in front of his mother. As his mother bids him goodbye, a wave of emotions overwhelms the prince, causing tears to well up in his eyes. Independence, after all, represents a divide between parents and their offspring. Even though the prince has the liberty to return at any time, the farewell still stirs up feelings of sadness. Under the onslaught of a severe snowstorm, he embarks on his journey towards the kingdom's northernmost region, a stretch of frozen soil tucked beneath towering icy peaks. His destination is the formidable ice continent, a place that no one has successfully reclaimed. The prince contemplates the hardness of the frozen soil, realizing that even iron would likely fail against it should he command someone to dig. As Prince Arel sticks his head out of the carriage window, he ponders the intentions of the nobles who assign him to this forsaken place, hollering that he will persevere, even if thrown into a lava pit. He boldly claims he'll turn this hostile environment into his personal paradise. Princess Kanya, less amused, tells him to stop his tomfoolery and shut the carriage window. Feeling grateful, Prince Arel appreciates his investment in the heat-producing magical tool, and even the coat gifted by the queen, despite his initial disdain for it. Princess Kanya, unfazed by his dramatics, points out that the carriage is already well insulated and urges him to stop exaggerating, causing her to wonder how much money was spent on this carriage. Prince Arel finds himself puzzled by Princess Kanya's casual attire despite the chilling temperatures. Utilizing his skills to perceive her mana, he's astonished to discover that she's using mana as insulation. It hadn't crossed his mind that Princess Kanya could perform such a feat, and he wonders if she's doing so instinctively. Impressed, Prince Arel compliments her on possessing such an incredible talent. Realizing that the prince has noticed her mana insulation ability, Princess Kanya assumes it to be a common skill, and he playfully counters that if she shared this belief with his escort knights, they would likely burst into tears, emphasizing the rarity of her skill. Prince Arel then earnestly questions Princess Kanya if she harbors any regrets about her choice. Emitting an imposing, dark aura, she retorts, questioning if his aversion towards her is so great that he can't bear her company. Undeterred by any objections, Princess Kanya resolves to accompany Prince Arel, adopting the guise of an apprentice knight. The king, the prince, and even her own mother spent an entire day attempting to dissuade her. Yet Princess Kanya remained resolute, disregarding their pleas and subsequently running away. Her actions reflect her determination and independence, willing to defy even her royal family to pursue her chosen path. Princess Kanya firmly expresses no remorse over her actions, viewing it instead as an excellent opportunity. Had she chosen to remain in the palace, she would have inevitably been betrothed in no time. Prince Arel, understanding her predicament, can't help but express surprise over the fact that she remains unengaged at her age of 19, which in their society is considered ripe for marriage. Prince Arel assumes that her decision to follow him was perhaps born out of a distaste for confinement. Princess Kanya, on the other hand, intends to embrace her freedom. The prince, curious, inquires about her prospective betrothed, to which she responds that she remains ignorant of his identity, as she had declined the arrangement without so much as hearing his name. Hearing this, Prince Arel can only sympathize with the unnamed man, who, he imagines, must be grateful to him for having been spared the challenge of dealing with Princess Kanya's spirited temperament. As their carriage finally rolls up to the estate, Prince Arel takes in the sight before him an army of 1,000 soldiers, 200 slaves destined to become the new residents of the territory, along with his coterie of alchemists and maids. Gazing at this tableau with resolute determination in his eyes, he stands on the precipice of his grand endeavor to build his own personal paradise amidst the harsh, icy wilderness. Prince Arel's first step was easily taken over by Asha and Sena, who commanded Falia's military. As for Princess Kanya, although it was a pity, the prince had no intention of entrusting her with any work at all. The reason is that he worried the knight's barracks would collapse in just one day with her in charge. As Prince Arel watched Princess Kanya frolicking in the snow, he speculated that she was not particularly concerned about the cold, considering how she had been tirelessly playing ever since they arrived. Settling into his chair, Prince Arel prepared to get down to work, unfazed by the flurry of activity outside. As Prince Arel delved into the records, he noticed that Falia had a population of approximately 10,000 people spread across 12 villages. He realized that reaching each village would require careful navigation. The majority of the inhabitants were hunter-gatherers, who had been dwelling in the area for many generations. There hadn't been any influx of new residents for quite some time, and the population had been steadily dwindling. As Prince Arel immersed himself further in the documents, he discovered that his new territory was not just impoverished, but was also on a dire trajectory toward ruin. He noted with interest that even the royal palace had exempted the territory from taxation, simply ignoring it rather than making an effort to uplift its conditions. Intrigued about the previous lord, Prince Arel delved into a ledger that contained more detailed information. It emerged that the previous lord had been ambitious, embarking on a grand endeavor to revitalize the land. Yet, owing to the territory's high deficit, the lord was forced to borrow money from other regions. Ultimately, the previous lord's ambitious dreams crumbled under the weight of financial struggles, leading to his bankruptcy. Overwhelmed with frustration, Prince Arel dismissively threw the ledger. He felt his mood sinking further into despair as he reflected on the grim prospects of his new territory and chastised the previous lord, thinking him to be a prime example of an imbecile, and shifted his attention to the map, hoping to obtain some alternate solutions. As he studied the map, Prince Arel pondered if there were any remarkable features about his land. Given the sparse population, he figured there must be numerous untouched trees dotting the region. An idea sparked in his mind: paper. Paper was considered a valuable commodity in their world. If he could harness the territory's resources to produce paper, perhaps he could overturn his current situation. Despite the dire circumstances, Prince Arel felt a surge of optimism. After all, his products were still maintaining steady sales. The next course of action now is to meet the village chiefs, the true commanders of the territories. After all, if the lord is incompetent, then there should be capable people who kept the village alive, and so Prince Arel sent out directives that no village chief should be absent. As the chiefs gathered in his estate, Prince Arel immediately discerned their robust strength, a trait presumably cultivated from the rigorous environment and the need to hunt in the frigid wilderness. He speculated that some of these hardened individuals could probably grapple wolves barehanded. As the village chiefs paid their respects to Prince Arel, recognizing him as their new lord, they humbly knelt before him. In response, Prince Arel reciprocated their greetings and formally introduced himself. Anticipating their perception of him as a mere child who happened to wield power, he felt the need to assert his authority from the get-go. Observing the crowd, Prince Arel noticed a relatively young face among the chiefs. Highlighting this, he reminded them of his explicit instruction, the summoning of all village chiefs. It was an unsubtle hint that he was perceptive, detail-oriented, and expected his commands to be adhered to. The youthful village chief, taken aback, hastily knelt down and explained that his ascension was a result of his father's passing earlier that year. Prince Arel, already aware of the situation, clarified that he hadn't intended to single out the young man. He just wanted to display his power. To show his hospitality, the prince had arranged a warm meal for the assembled chiefs. Understanding the rigors of their journey, he believed they would appreciate this thoughtful gesture. Their surprise and gratitude were evident, marking it as the first occasion a lord had shown such generosity. Contrarily, Prince Arel held a cunning scheme up his sleeve. He was conscious of the unwritten social rule. Those of lower ranks were often uncomfortable sharing a meal with their superiors. So, he decided to exploit this discomfort to his advantage. He persuaded them with false pleasantness, insisting they eat even if it would deplete his provisions. Reading their expressions, he could see the village chiefs squirming with unease. His heart was set on making this the most uncomfortable gathering they'd ever experienced. With a wry smile, he thought to himself that this could possibly be the worst feast ever. Their responses were filled with anxiety and reminded him of how hard he had to practice, all the while being the butt of Princess Kanya's and his escort's amusement. The village chiefs were overjoyed when they discovered their meal included meat, but to Prince Arel, he expressed his regret for not being able to provide them with a more luxurious feast. And as they took their first bites, their delighted expressions filled the room with joy. One of them noticed the taste of salt, and the prince was aware of how valuable this commodity was in the region. By sharing the same meal, he sought to forge a bond of unity with the village chiefs. The prince speaks candidly about the reality of their situation, making it clear that adherence to their current way of life would ultimately lead to their downfall. He poses a pointed question to them, asking if they would prefer a ruler who pursued lofty ideals but disregarded their well-being. His frank declaration stirs the chiefs, some reacting with a hostility bred from years of disillusionment. Prince Arel, however, remains undeterred, reiterating his point. If they continue down their present course for another decade, their homes, their way of life, and everything they hold dear will be lost. Prince Arel cautioned the village chiefs that in the days to come, he would issue a series of commands that might not be immediately comprehensible to them. However, he requested them to trust his judgment, assuring them that his intentions were rooted in the welfare of their villages. His bravado moved some of the chiefs, and began to regard him with religious admiration, likening him to a savior. However, Prince Arel quickly dispelled this image, as he had no desire to be associated with religious fanaticism. The prince promises them that even though it will be troublesome if they follow his orders, he will ensure that their lives improve. His first order is to accept the newcomers he brought along. These people, who were previously enslaved, would receive an education and work at the estate, helping with various tasks. The village chiefs express concern, pointing out that it's not their acceptance that's the problem, but rather how the other villagers might react. They wonder if the other residents will accept these newcomers into their community. Prince Arel is aware of the entrenched class divide and assures the village chiefs not to worry about it. All they have to do is accept them and pressure them, while showing a devious look since they already took his sincerity, causing the village's chiefs to shake in fear and ultimately accept defeat. After the meeting, the young village chief asks if the previous lords were similar to the prince. As the old village chief replies, with a certain level of skepticism, and finds him strange, he compares him to the previous lords, as most of the appointed lords never showed interest in the place. The previous lord attempted something but only ended up causing the residents to starve or become injured. Since the prince is just a young boy who recently had his coming-of-age ceremony, and the youngest royal prince at that, the old village chief ponders over the reason for his arrival, but hopes he won't be as foolish as the previous lord. After looking into the young lord's eye, he saw an extraordinary spirit that set him apart from those who had come before, and only time would reveal if this unusual prince could indeed bring about a change for the better. For now, they had no choice but to place their faith in their new, young lord. As Prince Arel lounged comfortably on Seta's lap, displaying a certain childlike ease, she inquired whether he was delving into the stack of documents recently handed over by the servants. With a look of concern, Prince Arel acknowledged that he was indeed doing so. Thinking back to when he had first assumed control, his estate was home to nearly 10,000 inhabitants. But upon meticulous inspection, he noted a decline in the population. Sena then mentioned that the population had dwindled considerably since her last assignment in Falia, acknowledging that the low birth rates were an inevitable consequence of the prevalent poverty in Falia. Prince Arel racked his brain for solutions. His available reserves topped out at approximately 450,000 gold pieces. If he continued operating under the status quo, his funds would be depleted within 50 years. Feeling that he had been set up to fail in Falia, he acknowledged the futility of farming in the area, knowing that the previous lord had tried and failed. As he continued to explore potential strategies, the prospect of trading and leveraging the area's unique commodities began to seem like a plausible solution. After pondering for a while, Prince Arel eventually found an idea, and he eagerly set out to establish the foundation for his new plan. The first step to save the ruined territory would be to improve the roads. Due to frequent snow and lack of proper maintenance, the ground was unstable, and the roads were in poor condition. The prince thus commanded the people of Falia to kick off a comprehensive road construction project, promising fair wages for their labor. While they harbored initial reservations, the people ultimately committed to the task, primarily due to the prince's commitment to shoulder the cost of construction. As the villagers assembled at the project site, they were taken aback by the resources at their disposal. One of the workers, upon inspecting the prince's plans, remarked on the expansive scope of the construction project. Unfazed, Prince Arel replied that the project's duration was of no consequence, assuring them that he would compensate their efforts generously. Encouraged by the prince's words, the workers became immediately energized. The residents worked diligently to complete the road construction while the prince observed them, noting that everyone was striving hard to ensure they could eat, which was an undeniable truth of the world. Once the road construction was completed, Prince Arel commended the workers for their outstanding efforts and asked them to till the rest of the land. The second step to save the ruined territory involved establishing a merchant company in Falia. Most merchants initially refused due to Falia's desolate reputation, but they were eventually convinced through the power of bribery. Indeed, who could resist? When one hand holds you by the collar, demanding your attention, and then the other presents a sack of gold, encouraging your silence and cooperation? With that, Prince Arel successfully set up the merchant company, dealing primarily with everyday essentials needed by the residents. Through the company, he was able to control the prices, ensuring fairness and affordability. This strategy not only benefited the residents, but also attracted peddlers and small merchants to actively participate in the trade, thus stimulating economic activity within the territory. For the final step to save the ruined territory, Prince Arel turned to Damon, asking whether the production of paper was within their reach. Despite its relatively low quality, paper made through a process of steaming and weaving fibers held considerable value, as the knowledge to produce it eluded the kingdom, making it expensive and reserved for the higher classes. Damon, recognizing the immense value this product could hold, showed great enthusiasm for the idea. However, He was uncertain about the production process and asked Prince Arel if he knew of anyone capable of initiating such a project. Prince Arel had already formulated a plan prior to bringing up the subject with Daemon. Anticipating Daemon's concerns about potential backlash from competitors, the prince assured him that the uniqueness of their production method would result in a product unlike any other currently available. Hence, they could legitimately claim to be selling a completely different item. Prince Arel laid before Daemon a detailed blueprint of the machinery required for paper production. Stunned, Daemon immediately acknowledged the perfection of its design. However, it was evident they couldn't construct it themselves due to its complexity. Yet, hope was not lost, as Daemon relayed that the royal capital housed a group of ingenious dwarves famed for their unrivaled craftsmanship and ability to materialize anything, no matter how intricate. The prince, delighted at this news, began to grab his money pouch, but his excitement was promptly curbed when Daemon mentioned that these dwarves were not easily persuaded, and their cooperation couldn't be bought with mere gold. Due to their pride, the dwarves preferred projects that allowed them to demonstrate their craft's excellence. Simply put, if they found a commission uninteresting, they wouldn't hesitate to decline. In the meantime, Daemon suggested sending the blueprint to one of the dwarves he knew, which Prince Arel warmly agreed to. Several days later, at the dwarves' blacksmith shop, an old dwarf was lecturing the others, urging them not to be lazy. He warned that any slacking off would result in a doubled workload the next day. Suddenly, he was interrupted by one of his apprentices, who informed him of a letter they had received. The master dwarf immediately grew angry, assuming it was yet another request from the nobles. However, he was corrected and told that it came from the same alchemist who had visited 10 years ago. Recognizing the name, he took the letter and eagerly began to read it. After reading the contents, the master dwarf asked his apprentice, Ben, to take charge of the others for a while. With an angered expression, the master dwarf swiftly left. Ben was curious about the letter's content, which had seemingly provoked the master dwarf and made him feel underestimated. And there you have it. Another chapter of Prince Arel's journey has come to a close. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry I can't use my human voice, but you'll hear it soon enough. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you on the next page.